What's up, Peter? How's it going, man?
Good, Joe. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. As good can be as can be expected in this situation.
I know. So this is Corona Podcast episode 4, and the
This is
date
episode
is
4. Here we are.
what's the date? What's the date today?
What is the date today? That's a good question, man. So we're on Friday, April 10th. Good Friday.
All right, Corona Podcast episode 4, Friday, April 10th. Good Friday. Um, praise Jesus.
So have you been holding on to that shirt for the last 8 years, just hoping for a chance to wear it?
Well, I think it's now more than ever. It's very easy for the struggle to stop Joseph Kony to move to the background in the midst of all this pandemic issue, but there are still children in Uganda, and Kony's after them. So we need to stop him. So Republicans, Democrats, come together. Let's get a military force into Africa as soon as possible.
Right. Right.
Kony 2012. All right.
All right. So, man, what are we talking about today? What's on the table?
Well, I think something that's kind of pressing right now is that is this issue of how 5G seems to be causing this coronavirus, and wherever they've knocked down these towers or set them on fire, it just seems to be going away completely.
Really?
I think that
Really?
I think we need to start burning down 5G towers as rapidly as possible. No, I maybe that's not a good topic for today's conversation.
No, we can save 5G for another day. So
All
look,
right.
here's what I wanted to talk about. So a
Yeah.
couple things that have been in the news recently that I think masks is something we should definitely hit on. That we should talk about the lack of institutional trust, and that definitely plays into the mask issue. But I mean, I couldn't help but notice what was in the news today, which is that the federal government sent a letter out to all the provinces, basically consulting on the idea of invoking the Emergency Act. I thought it was called the Emergency Powers Act. It's not. It's just the Emergency Act. And effectively, what that means is a type of martial law. Not a type of martial law. It is martial law. And I thought we could go over that. And I think it's relevant to our first two podcasts when we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. And my understanding is that the idea was shot down pretty quickly by most of the provincial governments, but it is an idea that's being talked about. It's on the table now. I wouldn't be surprised if the CBC starts soft selling it, and generally I think that's the direction we're moving in. And I actually went through the act itself. You can look up the legislation, and it's pretty fucking frightening. So I think we should talk about that.
This is the Emergency Measures Act. Is that right?
It's just called the Emergency Act. I'm
The
gonna
Emergency Act.
pull
This
it
is
up. The Emergencies Act. Yeah.
the Emergencies Act. So what's interesting is like when I remember you sort of like going over this with me, and there's sort of there's a list of articles in this act. Whereas like when we were talking about martial law before, like the research I did sort of looking into, like there aren't articles in a lot of places of martial law. It's just the suspension of rights, right? And the direct rule by military. So it means like anything goes. And like but what's useful about this is we can specifically go over like article by article and kind of get a picture of what this could potentially look like if it ever did happen.
So I have it pulled up here, and you could look on the canadajustice.gov site.
Yeah.
And okay, so under the section orders and regulations, the first thing that they list is the regulation or prohibition of travel to and from within any specified area where necessary for the protection of the health and safety of individuals. So right there, it's just saying freedom of association is gone completely, and that anyone who's a representative of the government can tell you where to go and I'm sure we'll get into what the penalties are for violating one of these rules.
So that's so no freedom of association, no freedom of travel. So that basically means like either they can tell you you can't go anywhere, or they can tell you where you can and can't go. Like,
yeah, it's worse than that. It's not
yeah,
just, you know, you can't gather in a public place with a couple of people.
yeah,
What the wording actually says is that they can tell you to go or leave or within any specified area. And any specified area could apply to your apartment building, your
yeah,
house, where you live, your place of employment. You know, this could be coming in and saying, well, we're designating the building you live in for some godforsaken purpose, and you need to get the fuck out now. Not having any sort of recourse or,
yeah.
yeah.
So this is actually like, I mean, there's something really important here is that like you could, looking at this one article alone, see conceivably how it might be employed against the plague specifically, right? Which is everybody stay in your homes. Essential service people go to work. You know, you we may need you to locate in this place. If you're identified as, say, someone who has the disease, you may need to be isolated in this particular place. People without, we might need to space you out. And that already starts to look a little bit creepy to me on some level.
And that
But
was being discussed by senior officials at the WHO, saying what's
yeah,
happening with social distancing is now the pandemic is confined to people's houses. And what we really need to do is start going into people's houses, finding the sick individuals and isolating them. And, you know, I'm not exactly sure what audience he was talking to. People can go pull up the YouTube clip. Maybe I can post it in the link description for our video.
yeah, we can
But
do.
but yeah, that idea was already on the table, you know? And so this is something that's, you know, would be codified into law, that they could come to your house, that they could grab you, that they could take you to some facility. Um, you know,
Yeah.
these aren't just prophylactic measures. This is completely tyrannical.
And I think the other thing is like what's important to remember here is this could be applied well beyond the purview of like dealing with COVID-19 as well, right? This could be like, you know, your home is now our home. We need this as like a station to house military troops who are stationed in the country. Like
Right.
you know, we need you to go to work doing this thing, or I guess we're getting into like further articles here, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways that this could be used beyond just like
Well, actually,
the need, the
let's go into
prospective.
Article B and C, because what you're saying leads into that.
Right?
The evacuation of, so this is B, the evacuation of persons and the removal of personal property from any specified area, and the making of arrangements for the adequate care and protection of the persons and property, and C, the requisition, use, and disposition of property. So they're not just saying that they can tell you where to go or what to do. They're saying they can come into your specific place of residence, and they can take any of your stuff if they deem it necessary. And everything will
Provide your
be
services.
justified under the purpose of fighting this virus. But we're talking about giving up. We're not even talking about giving up specific rights. Like, there just are no rights left once this is done. It's not just an attack on like they're saying everything you own is ours. We will take it if we deem it necessary. And, you know, who would you trust with this authority? Like, it's not that I don't trust our current provincial or federal government to handle this authority. I wouldn't trust anyone with this level of authority, let alone, you know, someone with a Peter Pan complex and a blackface fetish. You know, this is the last person, you know, I feel comfortable exercising, you know, king-like powers.
And the thing is like when you put that kind of power in the hands of the, say, the one person, right? You're actually putting it in the hands of like a group of people, right? Because you've got like Justin Trudeau, like, you know, whoever is in charge of the military in particular, right? And that creates all these like power imbalances and dynamics. And, you know, what if the military wants to hold on to that power? Um, once like who gets to say when it's over, right? There's this stuff can get very complicated. Um, I don't know how that's played out. Like, I think the last time we had like the Emergencies Act revoked was like the October crisis in Canada.
I'm not
Uh,
sure. It's
it's
worth looking into. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, that definitely raises the question of what happens if they invoke this Emergency Powers Act or Emergencies Act, and our leaders get sick and die in the middle of it. Which is not outside the realm of possibility. You can see Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, is sick. It looks like he's going to recover, which is good news. But you could imagine a situation in which the person who's supposed to give the orders is sick and can't give the orders for whatever reason.
yeah,
And, you know,
yeah. Like, it's scary to just throw away basically what rights and freedoms you have. And this is something that I think people have been conditioned to a little bit over the course of our lives as well, right? Like, since 9/11 in particular. But there's been, a few sort of measures that were put in place slowly over time. And I'm not talking about any kind of plan here, although, I think the argument could be made. But, like when all of a sudden there's FISA courts and there are these secret courts where someone can be taken in the middle of the night without a trial, without the right to a lawyer, without know what they're being charged with and interrogated. Like, that can happen to anyone now under the laws as they are, And that's a scary thing. And people just kind of accepted it. Like, it's just there and they got used to it. Like, all this like privacy stuff that used to be a very big deal to us, it's like, oh, well, my stuff's on Google. What are they going to do? Blah, 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 blah. What can I do? It just becomes very, very comfortable over
right.
time. I think that, there's been a level of conditioning like this where I don't know how people might react if it suddenly got rolled out in force. If there would be a balking, would they roll it out slowly, like invoke the act and then have a light touch initially, and then, as like the desperation increases, like if things, get out of control, roll it out more strictly. And I mean, I guess the real thing though here is that you're basically taking a gun and handing it to someone so they can point it at you, right?
All the
And
time.
then hoping that they're going to tell
Behave.
you to do good things.
Yeah.
And that's,
And this is, okay, so like, this is why we have not just activist groups, but we have built-in mechanisms to review police conduct, right? Because we don't just trust one institution or one group of people with an arbitrary amount of authority. There has to be people who monitor the people who monitor. And with an act like this, I mean, this is where the buck stops. There is no one who's going to be conducting reviews or audits of how the military behaves in a situation like this. There is not going to be any recourse. And also, like, who do you think is going to be doing these calculations about how to divide up all the resources, to determine whether, people coming into your house, do you have too many canned food? Do you have too much toilet paper? We need to take this much and redistribute it to someone else. And decide, doing this kind of like institutional triage about who gets resources, who doesn't, who gets to live, who dies. Like,
yeah.
these are not geniuses who work for the federal government, like if if they were very, if they were smart, they'd have real jobs. But that, like, these are mid-level administrators and government bureaucrats who are going to make these sort of decisions. And one of the things, and I don't think it's a hyperbolic example, but when this is something I know about just because of my own family history, but when people started to do serious historical analysis into what happened during the Holocaust and what took place during World War II, people discovered that it was an infrastructure that was largely run by bureaucrats and administrators and desk clerks. And they were the people making the trains run on time, and they were the people making sure that camps were built to specifications. And this is this is where the phrase "the banality of evil" comes from. That it doesn't necessarily have to begin with any sort of evil
Yeah.
intent or whatever. But the point is, once these institutional structures get set into motion and they have some sort of directed goal or focus, anything and everything gets sacrificed to whatever that goal is. And in this case, it's going to be stopping the pandemic. And
And that in
these are not
itself,
people who
too.
are qualified to do that. These are not
Yeah.
healthcare providers. They're not scientists or epidemiologists. These are going to be people managing social behavior,
And that in and of itself, too, the goal of stopping the pandemic is very nebulous as a term, right? Like, what does it mean to
Right.
stop the pandemic? Does it mean that like Corona is wiped off the face of the earth forever? Like, there's a lot of ambiguity in that, and that could be easily exploited to, you know, have us not know when it's time to stop this thing. And even like someone with like legitimate intentions of like maintaining safety and having this level of power and pushing these things around and directing things might sort of say, well, we've got the vaccine, it's been distributed to like 80% of the people, but until like 100% of the people worldwide have it, then we need to make sure that the virus isn't, you know what I mean? Like, this could drag on for a very long time in ways that are unpredictable. And the longer it goes on, like, the more dangerous I want to say it could get, but I think it will get, because
Yeah.
just having that level of power in somebody's hands for a very long time and people being more and more accustomed to it um, is it's a scary thing.
Yeah. It's definitely scary. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about that was included in the act when I was looking over it was they talked about mandatory conscription of certain classes of people for certain types of work. And on the surface, this may seem like, yeah, they're going to tap healthcare workers or retired doctors to go work in hot, but no, that's not what that means. What that means is that we're going to or give ourselves the authority or power to conscript, forcibly force people to work to do any sort of purpose that is deemed beneficial for the greater social good. And that's the type of language that's used to describe this, like in service of the greater social good or public welfare, right? So it's not just doctors. That's you know, they need they need to build something, so they need able-bodied men to come build it, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there are people at your house saying, well, you're going to do this, right? And if you don't, you're going to basically be imprisoned,
Yeah.
or who knows, who
So I
knows
can think of
what.
like just like a few things off the top of my head that like would be like pandemic related and then like sort of greater and greater extremes. Just to sort of lay out examples of like, so one might be there's a lot of, God forbid, there's like a lot of dead people and we need to deal with the bodies. So you're on corpse detail, right? You're young, you're able-bodied. We need people to go and like carry these away, dispose of them.
Mhm.
Uh, there's not enough healthy people to manage the power station. Like, you're being conscripted into, if you have skills as an electrician, like, to manage that kind of stuff. If you don't, to do like menial jobs that you'll be instructed to by somebody else. Or it could be something like, this area has been brought under quarantine and we need people to make sure that nobody violates that quarantine, right? We don't have enough soldiers to police the whole thing. Now that third one is like a little extreme, and I doubt that they'd be putting that kind of power in the people's hands that weren't part of the authority, but who knows? And this is another thing about this, right? Is let's say, like, if I take something that might strike us as totally irrational, like, they take advantage of these things to like create some sort of concentration camp or something horrific like that. Like, I don't see why that would necessarily happen, but the language of this thing is structured so that things like that are not outside the realm of possibility in situations like this.
Yeah,
And also,
let me give the exact language so we know what we're working with.
yeah,
So This is orders and regulations, Section 8, no, letter D. The authorization or direction to any person or any person of a class of persons to render essential services of a type that the person or person of that class is competent to provide, and the provision of reasonable compensation in respect of services so rendered. So it's written in the most general possible terms. They get to define what an essential service is. That does not mean the list of essential services that Doug Ford declared essential in Ontario. That's just whatever they make up at the time. And the authorization or direction of any person or class of persons. People under the age of this, people over the age of this, people with the following preconditions, you know?
Yeah.
They
Not to
basically
mention
made it
things
general.
like color, gender, like ethnicity, like, you know, I don't see reason why they would go there, but okay, this is the thing that I like, sort of the point I want to
Income
make.
level, you know, a class
level,
of people with income above this, you know, a class of people with income below this, you know?
All of that, yeah. But I guess this is the thing, is like, you know, when you start to imagine scenarios like this, I think there are a lot of people that go, like, I don't think our government would ever do anything like that. Those are really extreme situations and stuff like that. But this is the thing. Why is that? Like, if that is indeed true, why is that? It's because there are protections in place. There are legal boundaries at which they're not supposed to cross. And we're talking about the suspension of those boundaries, right? For an undetermined period of time. So like the things that make you think, oh, I don't think the government would do that, are being removed. Yes. And I think people need to think in those terms, right?
Yeah, and so we have both, at various points in our lives, worked in group homes around vulnerable people. And the situation inside group homes is not that different from the situation inside a prison, inside a long-term care facility. And what I mean by that is not to compare those three types of institutions and say they're the same, but anytime you give people arbitrary amounts of power over other people that are quite vulnerable, you always have the same situation play out, which is that there are abuses of power unless there are strong checks and balances in place, unless there's strong oversight in place, unless there's mechanisms set up to make sure that people don't abuse their power. Because it's not a statement about long-term care facilities or group homes or prisons. It's a statement about people, and it generalizes in a universal way that people often do not do well when they are given arbitrary amounts of authority and power over other people. And you can look at those institutions, and people can do their homework and look at some of the abuses that have taken place inside places like that if they want evidence to back that up. But the point is,
we referenced the Stanford prison experiment before in a previous episode too, right? Which is, I think, something that would be very useful to look up in this context again. We should put a link actually to like the documentary about that. I think it would be
the Netflix show was good too. The Netflix did like their own version of it. It was good. Good for Netflix.
And there's good like sort of information resources on YouTube. We should check that out. Just to sort of give an outline to people of what happened and what it is, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that really ties in with what you're talking about anyway.
Yeah, so like, just to pull back a bit, like the specific measures in this act are incredibly extreme and sweeping. And in a situation like this, where coronavirus may be with us for the next 18 months, maybe like the flu, where it comes around every year, where there's not going to be a huge impetus to scale this thing back. There is no going to be going back to normal. There's just going to be a new normal. And if the death rate starts shooting up, which it's likely to do, we're not at our peak yet, and people get really scared, that's when they're going to be more agreeable to reaching out to the government for some sort of heavy-handed response that they will think will make them safer. And I think people need to read this act and figure out what's actually in it. And I'd be curious in discovering if there's ever been an example of military rule where no one has any rights, in which it's ever been implemented in a responsible way, where there haven't been rampant abuses. And
the ones that we end up knowing about.
right. And, you know, there's a notion here that what I worry about is the games of triage that these bureaucrats are going to be playing with everybody. You know, crunching numbers, looking at models, trying to consult subject matter experts, and then coming up, and then what that will translate into is who gets medicine, who doesn't, who gets to keep their food, who doesn't, who gets to stay in their apartment, who doesn't, who gets conscripted into work against their will, who doesn't. And I don't trust these people to make those kind of decisions. I don't think our government is a you know, a bastion of competence. You know, I haven't seen many government programs implemented well. In fact, I know of very little government programs that are ever implemented well. And this is just going to be a big government program that's going to, you know, be a shit show.
Yeah. I wonder where you'd be allowed to spend your UBI in this scenario. You know, it's like.
But yeah, well, apply for the CERB, man. You know, you secure the bag, get that money.
Yeah. We're taking 1,000 random people and we're going to test new vaccine possibilities on them. But you know, $2,000, and we're taking all the food that you might have bought with that $2,000, and we're redistributing it. And like, you know, they're going to take your toilet paper.
So let me tell a story here. So, you know, it's been in the news recently about the mask thing, and
yeah, recently,
you know, our own top doctor, along with officials at the WHO and CDC, everyone pretty much did it in about face like a week ago, in which they all of a sudden discovered that masks were actually effective. And they said, you know, like, we're just basing this on new information and new studies. And the CDC on their website, they said that, you know, our new updated assessments are based on studies that came out of Hong Kong. And then they listed a whole bunch of academic articles. And if you go to them, you can see that they all trace back to months ago. So this was not information that came out a week ago. And, you know, it raises the question of, like, the science on masks is well understood. It has been for a long time. There's a really great activist group called Masks for All that's composed of mainly scientists and computer scientists who've been looking at the data and looking at the research. And they compiled sort of all the information and papers going back like 10 years, not just through this pandemic, but through SARS, through MERS, through influenza. And the evidence is overwhelming. And it raises the question of why did they...
Just to interject, the evidence goes back 10 years, not the group.
Yeah, the evidence, yeah. And it raises the question of why were all these doctors and representatives of these institutions who knew better coming out and saying that masks aren't really that effective. In fact, they might be worse for you. You know, that they might actually have a negative effect. And like, what are they doing? They're obviously not trying to get people killed. They're obviously not malicious in that manner. But what they were worried about was the global supply chain. And they were looking at the numbers, and they knew that there were not enough masks for healthcare workers and doctors and healthcare providers, which is where they're needed most. And so they figured if the average person started stockpiling masks or hoarding up on them, it would make that healthcare problem even worse, which is a entirely reasonable way to think. It's a reasonable line of argument, and it's factually correct. But what they should have done, at least in my opinion, is they should have came out and said something like, of course, masks are helpful. Like, we're not going to lie to you about the basic science or the facts. But even though they're helpful, you still shouldn't wear one because they're more helpful in the hands of the doctor. And the reason I think this matters is because it points to a real lack of trust in the authority figures and in the institutions. And to give like a really specific example, like I have a parent who's immunocompromised, right? And she happened to have masks lying around, not particularly like the N95 medical mask, but a type of mask. And, you know, for the first couple of weeks of this, when she was still going around the city for walks and stuff, she wasn't wearing one. She wasn't using them, even though she had them, because she was told by the authoritative sources that these things were not helpful, that they might even cause more damage. And
they
these masks
said that they might cause more damage.
More
they might
damage.
Do more harm than good, right?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just like they don't work. They said they might do more harm than good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the masks that they had, you know, they're part of a box that's open. Like, these things could not have been donated to a hospital even if they wanted to. And these are the type of people where, like, that I'm talking about would have donated the fucking mask, you know? But the point is, the only person that those masks could have helped, they couldn't have gone to a hospital, they couldn't have gone to healthcare workers or frontline support providers or whatever. The only person that could have helped was, you know, in this case, my immunocompromised parent, who could have been walking around with a mask and didn't. And, you know, it had real consequences, this notion of managing the information flow, because people are too stupid to think this through for themselves, that if you tell people masks are effective, they can't be trusted with that level of information because we have a healthcare problem that we're trying to manage. And it's like, there are real consequences to saying things which are not true and easy to check, you know? And now, like, these are the same people who would be delivering your healthcare bulletins during a time of martial law where we may not have a free press, you know? And it's like, how are we supposed to trust these people?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things you said in that was, you know, they are saying or thinking we cannot be trusted with the truth, right? But their refusal to give us the truth puts us in a position where they're the ones that can't be trusted because they won't give us the truth.
That's right.
Right? And I mean, this is like a crisis of trust on a large scale because they're saying all kinds of things, right? We are constantly being inundated with information from various institutions, from, like, you know, the CDC, the WHO, the various governments of the world, the various media institutions, and they all have agendas here, you know, and we're being lied to. I mean, not just now, but, like, you know, we have been lied to repeatedly by all of these people. And now that the danger of that kind of stuff, that lack of trust, has become acute, right? For the very reasons you mentioned, because, like, lives are on the line with regards to this. And I think another example of what we're talking about is the whole fiasco around hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, hold on 1 second before we get into that. I just got to go turn something off.
Okay.
And just let me hold on.
All right. Hello, podcast people. So,
sorry about that.
That's no worries.
Got food.
I thought
food in the oven,
I was
you know?
getting ready to monologue. I was getting nervous there.
You're like, damn, this is my fucking time, you know?
My Coney platform. But we should do one on the whole Coney thing sometime. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Oh, God. Don't remind me.
It's not Corona related, but that was a crazy time. But yeah.
That was a well-produced video. I will say that.
You
know,
who does actually a great presentation on that was Brett Venant from the School Sucks podcast, which I highly recommend to anyone who.
I'll check that
out. Yeah, he did a whole series called Logic Saves Lives, where he explored, like, the process of constructing logical arguments, went into the logical fallacies and stuff. And he used sort of real world examples that he played that out through. And one of them was the whole Joseph Kony thing. And I think it was from the perspective of, like, 1 or 2 years after the fact. But yeah, I digress.
Yeah, it's worth going into another time, though.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, this hydroxychloroquine thing, right? Because, like, So as I understand it from the research that like I've done personally, um, there is this drug that was an anti-malaria drug that is a generic drug, which means that there is no current patent on it, which means that multiple companies can produce it, could potentially distribute it cheaply. It's already been approved by the FDA because it's been in use for some time. Its effects are well known. Um, the risks are well known. All of these kinds of things. That so apparently, where it has been tested in certain countries, there have been, for the most part, like promising results. Nothing conclusive yet, um, but there have been what appear to be effective uses of this, and some risks as well. Some studies apparently have shown that it hasn't had a positive effect. So there is a scientific conversation that needs to happen around this drug. Researchers and data scientists and virologists and epidemiologists and doctors, like these people are the people that should be putting their heads together and exchanging information and keeping us posted in an honest way about this stuff. However, because Trump um, said something initially about how this drug is promising, and there was a reaction from the media of Trump putting people in danger by telling them to use this drug. And then I think responses from him where he started talking about the drug more, in my view, because, you know, he's pushing back against the media in this like forever battle that they've had going.
Which never ends.
Yeah. So there's a different conversation going on about hydroxychloroquine. And I think a lot of people regard being against the drug as an anti-Trump stance, right?
Yeah. Do you want me to give the numbers? Because like I think they're actually worth going over.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
And keep in mind, what I'm about to read is information that was accessible to the New York Times when they wrote the article. Okay, these people have an editorial staff, they have fact checkers, they could have reached out to the White House for comment. I can't believe they didn't do any of this stuff. I can't believe they weren't just given these answers. But according to Trump's 2019 financial disclosure, he owns between $1,000 and $15,000 in Dodge and Cox fund. According to Dodge and Cox prospectus, their fund's assets, they have 2.9% in Sanofi. And what this amounts to is that Trump owns 2.9% of a potential $15,000, which means that his net amount of stock in the particular company that makes this drug owned through a single-digit percentage share of a mutual fund is between $435, and there's probably an upper bound on that too. But the point is,
but it could go up to
Trump,
like 500.
I would be amazingly surprised if Trump even knew he had this, if he owned it. With someone with his level of assets and the type of financial portfolio that guy has, like this is such chump change. And
not to mention, it's not the only company. It's a generic drug. So
it's a generic drug
that's licensed to produce this drug. So it's not the only company that stands to profit, and in fact may not profit if the drug becomes approved and there's some contract worked out with a different company, right? So it's like we're talking about a small chance that Trump might make like $600.
But there's a big chance that the New York Times just poisoned the well in terms of people's reactions to a potentially life-saving medication, because they wrote an article giving you the impression that Trump somehow stands to personally profit from this particular medication and politicized a healthcare issue in their ongoing vendetta against this president. And that has real consequences.
Yeah.
Like, once again, the New York Times, the Center for Disease Control, the WHO, these are big institutions and authority figures that you are supposed to be able to trust. And like, this information was not hard to find. It wasn't hard to actually look at the financial disclosure records to find out how much of this particular company Trump actually owns or what his actual stake in it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there's a message to people, it's just like when it comes to masks, when it comes to a particular medicine, do your own research, because these institutions, these big legacy media institutions and government institutions are not honest. And there is like an open source, nearly limitless amount of information that exists in parallel to these legacy structures that's accessible to you, to anyone. And
Yeah.
people need to look this stuff up and think for themselves.
Yeah. And that goes both ways too, right? Because I think Trump really is like kind of pushing back, like I was.
Right. Don't believe Trump.
Yeah.
Don't believe the New York Times. What I'm arguing for is that people should check things out themselves and make up their own minds. You know.
Because I believe he's been saying things along the lines of, you know, ask your doctor to give you hydroxychloroquine and things like that. And, you know,
right.
like this is something that is still being studied, you know, and but this is exactly what's problematic about it, right? Is that political wins might move the availability of this drug in or on or off the chessboard, like in the fight against COVID-19 here, right? And what should be moving this drug on or off the chessboard are, like, you know, is the research,
right,
and the tests and the results of these things. And those are the recommendations that may well get suppressed by political wins, you know, because of this, because of the shit going around. And so I think, like, yeah, so all of these issues that we sort of talked about between the masks and, you know, martial law and like the drug, like, I think there's this sort of theme of a crisis of trust, right? Like, there is a lot of information. Like, see, that this pandemic,
I think you just named the episode there.
Crisis of trust.
Crisis of trust.
There we go. But yeah, because the pandemic is worldwide, we have what is, although a tragic, it is one of the largest experiments in epidemiology and virology ever conducted, right? Because it is happening across all demographics, all populations, all nations, different climates, you name it, right? It's happening everywhere. It's happening over like an extended period of time. And all of this information that comes out of that experiment has to be analyzed, aggregated, researched, tested. And this is like our primary, like, in a way, this like disease is giving us the tools we need to fight back by giving us an abundance, a massive abundance of information, right? Like, this is why we have like a vaccine on the horizon in like maybe a year instead of like 10 years, right? Because this is like, you know, things are moving forward at a speed that's like unheard of before. But like the thing is if we can't trust the information that's floating around, you know, there's this massive amount of data that is being fucked with. I don't know what else to say, you know? Yeah, it's a huge risk. It's working for the virus, you know? Like, you're working with the enemy in this fight, you know?
Right. And yeah, we need some transparency, some accountability and integrity from our institutions, especially if they're going to be asking us to give them unprecedented amounts of power. Like, I'm not impressed with this bunch, you know?
Yeah.
Not so far, you know?
Well, I would say to anyone in the media, like anyone in a position of power that has access to this information, like, you know, now is the time to find your honor. You know, like, I can't think of a better way to put it than that, because it's like, it's not like we can legislate this problem away. It's not like we can pass laws that says the media have to tell the truth, or, you know, like,
find your voice, find your backbone, find your integrity.
Yeah.
People are going to be measured by how they acted during this thing. They're going to be remembered for it.
Yeah.
You know?
And your lack of honor right now is like killing people, you know, whoever, not you, Joe, obviously. But, you know, like, and I think about, like, you know, a lot of the changes that I see people making that are positive as a result of this pandemic, like, you know, like I've been more cautious about what I eat because I want to keep my immune system up. And I already had like a good diet and exercise routine going, but like it's really amped up in the face of this. I've been more frugal about what I spend. You know, I've been, yeah, like I've just, well, we put a podcast together. You know, like we've been talking about this for a while. We should do something. What'll it be like? I don't know. We listened to it. Do we like it? We just went for it and we uploaded what came out. And everybody, this is the result. But like, there's something happening now. You know what I mean? And like, so like, and I see that happening with a lot of people. You see a lot more people jogging, riding their bikes around. Like, I would speculate that a lot of people are making a lot of positive changes because they kind of, you know, they're fighting back in their own ways. And I don't see why somebody who has, you know, lived their life with a lack of integrity can't take this global threat as an opportunity to change themselves and start acting with more honor, you know? And I hope that some people will. I mean, obviously, I hope that everyone would, but you know.
No, I love that, and I love that sentiment, and I think that's as good a place to end it for this one. But we'll definitely pick this up. And is there anything else you want to add though before we jet?
Stop Coney 2012.
All right, Peter. Thanks for chatting, and thanks everyone for watching. And everyone stay healthy out there, and do your own research, and don't immediately trust everything you hear. And we will see you next time.
All the best, everybody.
All right.